understanding the business value and delivering to that. Now, in order to be able to do that, one of the key levers, as we spoke about culture, structure, and process, culture does become very important, because many of us come from a very technology rooted organization. It has enabled us a certain level of control, a certain level of autonomy, a certain level of flexibility. And yet, when you have to get into the business centric kind of a DevOps environment, the overall perspective has to be broadened. And there is a very high level of collaboration that's required. We may not have all the information. There is a high level of ambiguity in the market. Many expertise and experts have to come together as well. So in that context, I think the collaborative culture is extremely important. And to take us through that, I'm delighted to have Rajat take over from this point. So over to you, Rajat.
Thanks, Anant. And Dimitri, we can move on to the next slide. Sorry, it'll be Nivarti. Please move on to the next slide. Okay, so we already seen this slide, and as we can see here, 16% who succeeded brought about a fundamental shift. Now, the underlining word is fundamental here, because a change of culture is something which is very fundamental to the organization. So let's try and understand a bit more about what is culture and how do we bring about a change in it. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so how do we see culture? Culture is something which is so deeply embedded, not just in our organization, but our social network and our family, that we can compare our understanding of culture to a parable of the 5 blind men who were trying to understand what is the elephant by touching and feeling it. And so when they went on and they tried to touch and feel the elephant, the person who touched the tail thought that it's a rope. The one who touched the trunk thought that it's a snake. And none of them could get a full comprehensive understanding of what it is. Now that's very understandable, because culture is something which is very complex, has multiple facets to it. And what you see, what is visible of culture is actually just 10% of what is not seen by us. So largely we tend to ignore it. We tend to let it run in the background while we do all our work around strategy and planning and let's have a DevOps organization. And while we're doing that, we are not really looking at culture in the true sense of the word. Let's move to the next slide, Nivarti. So, but the issue is that we cannot ignore culture. And the basic reason is that, as famously said by Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And culture, when it eats strategy, in the sense that the organizational leadership has thought of bringing about a significant change, of empowering the team, of bringing in DevOps as a mindset, as an organization. But if the culture is not aligned, if the basic assumptions, the underlying assumptions and the artifacts, as we'll discuss, are not aligned to that strategy, it will not happen. And when that doesn't happen, the transformation will not happen. So whether we like it or not, we have to address culture to ensure that there's a sustained change towards DevOps. So coming to understanding culture, as I mentioned, 10% of culture is what we see, but 90% is what we actually don't see. What we see is actually known as artifacts, as we can see here on this iceberg picture. Artifacts are the visible aspect of culture. How do we engage with each other? We take decisions, we communicate, the way we dress up, the layout of our offices, the rituals, and all those behaviors that can be clearly seen. The way the leadership is driving decisions, or is driving rewarding and punishing, the way promotions are given, the people asked to go, the way people are recruited. All those things are what we see, and they are a part of the overall cultural fabric. But beyond that, we have what are known as espoused values. Now, every organization is wanting to move somewhere. It is aspiring to grow, to be bigger. It is dreaming about something. Whatever that dream or aspiration is a part of the espoused values of the organization. So let's say organization wants to become a DevOps organization, wants to have higher productivity, be more client-centric, be more empowered. Those are the espoused values. And these are ethical statements of rightness. But at the bottom and deepest down there are the underlying assumptions. And these are what people believe is the way things happen in this organization. What is the right way to do things? So if my boss is espousing, or my boss is saying that we need to be more client-centric, but actually in my organization, we need to be more focused internally, because that will get me a promotion. That'll ensure that my boss is happy. That'll ensure that I move forward. And that's the way people are doing things here. So underlying assumptions are the truths, are the beliefs hidden inside the organization, and that is how the organization is being run. So the problem here usually happens when there is a misalignment between these three critical aspects of culture. So just move on, Nivarti. Yeah, yeah. So so how do we diagnose culture? So of course, this is a very intricate and very elaborate exercise, but just to give you a sense of how do we diagnose a culture and the misalignment with the culture is what we do is we try and understand what are the differences between the artifacts or the behavior and what people are thinking they should be doing. So in an organization, if they're saying we need to have more empowerment of people, but you realize that though they talk about empowerment, but the decisions are all centralized. Or they say that we should be working in teams, but in reality, everyone is working as individuals and they are not really believing in teamwork. So these kind of gaps between what is being said and what is being done is the starting point to start understanding where are the misalignments in this culture. And these differences help us to start identifying the underlying assumptions of what are those truths which are really moving that organization. So moving on, uh, Nivarti, you can move on, please. So let's look at what are the elements of a successful DevOps culture. So if you're having a culture or in your organization which is successful, you'd clearly be having espoused values, which are being communicated, being told by your leaders, being expounded to everyone, whether it's internal or external stakeholders. You have espoused values that we have teamwork, we are client focused, we build quality into delivery, we have empowered teams, teams which can take their own decisions and which are working autonomously. Now, while you have these espoused values, the underlying assumptions are also similar. And here the language is different, but the language is very important. So it's like if I share responsibility, I will grow in this organization. If I have a growth mindset, then we will do well because we have seen us succeed with the growth mindset. Or if I'm empowered and autonomous work, if my team is empowered, we will be more productive. I love delighting the customer because it has worked for us. And feedback is great because our organization has grown, has thrived, has been successful because we gave feedback to each other. So the underlying assumptions, the language is one which says that it'll be good for us if we do these things. So the underlying assumptions get aligned to the empowered, to the espoused values. And when that happens, the behavior of people, which are the artifacts, will show up in a very significant way, which will be that people will actually be engaging with clients. There'll be better conflict management, less blaming, quicker decision making, and people will learn from failure. So the behavior, because as we understand, behavior is a visible demonstration of culture. So how people act shows you what the culture is, whether it is at your organization, your home, or your social groups. Now, a DevOps culture in reality is one which needs to shift away from the traditional modes. Any organization, from the time when it starts with a power driven or a pathological culture, because here it's a smaller organization. There is somebody who has been leading it, maybe the founder or the CEO. He's been growing it fast. He's the power center. He's been building it, driving it fast, and he's been taking the decisions. As the organization moved out, slowly they started bringing rules, bringing a structure, a process, because they wanted people to do work without being looked at all the time. There had to be some sense of freedom, but at the same time there had to be rules in place. So from a power driven to a rules driven. But a DevOps is a third generation where you have to have a generative culture, where the power comes from the bottom, where the decisions are taken at the team level, where the client's responsibility is taken end to end, not just by the leader, but by everyone in the team. So that empowerment and structure has to be brought in. So the shift, so we are very clear about what is the shift that we need to have for a DevOps culture, which is a generative culture. And this kind of a culture has three critical aspects, and which we call as the triad of a DevOps culture. One is, of course, the generative behavior. The second is the speed or agility, and third is resilience, which is, because when the whole responsibility, the accountability, and decision making shifts downwards, There is higher, there has to be higher resilience to managing failure, to be able to engage with the client and learn from it. So that kind of an approach has also to be brought in. So the overall shift for DevOps is clearly from power to rules and towards empowerment and structure. Let's move on. So let's now here try and come back to your workplace. We've got a sense of uh, the importance of culture. We also got a sense of the different components of culture, the artifacts, espoused values, and the underlying assumptions. Now you may want to ask these questions to yourself, that in your organization, in your workplace, do you see collaboration, shared responsibility? Now, we're not talking about what they say. We're not talking about what the leadership is communicating or what is being written out there. What is really happening? What is the behavior that you're saying? But do you see trust to each other? Are there silos in your organization? Are you struggling with value conflicts? Value conflict is one where what you feel is important and the organization feels that something else is important. Maybe you feel that you'd like to take decisions on your own. You want to be empowered, but your boss feels that no, he's the one who should be taking the decisions. That's a value conflict. Or are you driving a growth mindset, in the sense that are you always looking at how you can be better instead of just trying to do compliance level work and keep everyone happy? So these questions can actually help you to get a sense of what is the level of misalignment in your organization from a DevOps perspective. Because DevOps is a generative culture. It's one which talks about growth mindset, value stream mapping, autonomous team management, and of course, delegation of accountability. So that kind of a culture will clearly need to have behavior which is aligned to it. So let's move on. Yeah. So now that we have understood, got a sense of course, what is culture and where do we need to move in terms of a DevOps culture. The question comes that what do we do to get shift ourselves to that kind of a culture? Now, this is a whole process, and obviously, culture is something which is deeply embedded. There is a lot of unconscious aspect of culture which we don't really sense all the time, and which are the underlying assumptions. So a shift of culture requires time and it requires intervention at different levels. The first kind of intervention is the leadership. End of the day, a significant part of culture change happens with leadership, because everyone is looking at the leader. What is the leader? What is it that the leader is giving priority to? What is it that the leader is ignoring? What is it that the leader is role modeling? What is it that the leader likes, dislikes? So that will decide how people behave, what they feel is the right thing to do in this organization. So the leadership has to take charge and move forward. So the leadership doesn't mean the top leadership. It could be the leader of a team. It could be the leader even of a 3-member, 4-member team. But that leader has to drive that aspect of culture. Now, this happens by role modeling, communicating clearly what is required, and clarity of behavior. Because if, let's say, I say that our organization is client focused, what does that mean for our organization? What behavior will show us that we are client focused, right? So that clarity is brought by the leadership, and it could be done by various things like breaking down silos, delegate decision making, support automation, and so on. So that will be contextual. That will depend upon the kind of organization and the struggle that you're having there. But yes, these are the action points. After the leadership takes charge, the next are the modes of learning, because people have to be taught the new kind of behavior, and that is where time and money and effort has to be spent to help them learn, to understand, to be familiar with the behavior that we are requiring, whether it could be in terms of agility or automation or decision making. There are a lot of organizations I've worked with where we have been wanting to empower decision making down the line, but the team members are not willing. They don't know how to do it, so they keep going back to their bosses to help take decisions. So here people have to be taught in a way that the new behavior is this is how you do it and you can do it. And finally, you come to social learning. Now, social learning is the magic uh, that happens when true culture comes in, because here people move beyond learning and then they start thriving in that new behavior. They start learning from each other. They start talking about it when they're having lunch or coffee. They start teaching each other, and they have pride in that kind of behavior. They truly start believing that this behavior is going to help me and it's going to help my team and the organization. Now, how is this done? It's done by various inputs like ritualization, games, stories. Stories are very powerful in building culture, and peer learning. So spending time with the team, success stories, and structuring peer learning in very simple and articulate ways can make the difference. The interesting thing here is that culture transformation is not expensive. It requires the right effort and time, and you can make a huge difference if you are able to get the right inputs at the right time. Okay, moving on. Nivarti, we can, yeah. So when we look at culture transformation from a DASA DevOps approach, we clearly have our competence model in place, where what we understand from our experience of having built DASA organizational culture is that the four areas which are critical for a successful and productive a DevOps culture is courage, DevOps leadership, understanding what is DevOps and how do we go about it, team building, because that's one critical aspect or one pillar of DevOps, and of course, continuous improvement, so that we keep the feedback loop and value stream mapping to ensure that the client keeps getting better products each time in each iteration. So these four skill areas are actually what we focus on when we are building a DevOps organization through our process and our approach. Okay, moving on. So in this in the DevOps coach program, that is what we have been doing now. What you will be learning is a lot about culture. As we understand, culture is critical to building a DevOps organization. So you'll be learning about what is culture, understanding the elements of culture, the structure of a successful DevOps culture, how to shape culture for sustained change, and most importantly, what's the role of a coach in driving culture? Because you'll be going as a coach, not as a leader. So you'll be a catalyst. You'll be helping the leader, hand-holding the leader to help him shift into a DevOps culture. So with that, I come to an end of my session. Thank you so much. And we
Thank
can
you.
always take questions.
Yeah,
So
thanks,
I hand
Rajat.
over.
There is one question. There is one question I just noticed in the window. I mean, there are many questions, but in the interest of time, I want to pick up the one that sort of struck a chord. It was around the value conflicts. So Niranjan was asking a question: would these conflicts be different at individual, team, and organization levels? And if so, how do you resolve them?
Fantastic. Great question, Niranjan. So yes, absolutely. These values are, these conflicts can happen at an individual level, in the sense that you as an individual could have a conflict with your team or your organization. It could be at team levels also. If suppose it's a very cohesive team. So for example, let's say you got a team which has been around for some time and has built certain value systems which have been successful in your managing clients. And then suddenly some new leadership comes in and says, hey, we want to engage with the clients in a different way, and the whole team starts saying, hey, listen, this is not the way we have succeeded, this is not what we feel is the right way to do it. And that's where a team versus organization can also come in. Now the question here is that sometimes these value conflicts are so fundamental that you can't really reconcile them. So there, either you shift to a different part of the organization, or you look at how you can, maybe not be there. Because every one of us goes through that experience. But there are many times, largely, that reconciliation does happen because we are able to see what is the value that the organization seeing in those uh, paradigms or those beliefs, and then we can align ourselves to some extent to those value system of the organization. They do change, as leadership changes, sometimes value systems change, and these conflicts keep coming up and going away. And this is very contextual, so you can't really generalize these things.
Thank you. Thanks, Rajat. And please keep the questions coming. We're probably not answering all of them over here, but we do assure you that we will take these questions, work on the answers, and perhaps we'll figure out if we can put it up on the DASA site and make it accessible in terms of our own perspectives around that. We'll come back to you with how we're going to respond to that and how we provide you access for that as well. So great conversation, Rajat. I think you spoke about elements of culture. And as I set up Akhil for his session, it's very interesting. There is a question out there, and it really speaks to what Akhil, in some sense, is really going to cover as well. This is from Anuj, who said, based on a lot of conversations about business value and value realization, he says the ability to expedite value realization is going to be really dependent on our ability to respond as fast as we can, and that is a function of the feedback loops as well. So how do you make sure that we are able to respond faster to feedbacks and able to factor that so that the value realization also happens faster? And I think it's a great question that really speaks to why I think we need to look at value stream architecture itself. So that's really the context for Akhil's topic. And thanks for really asking that question as well. So over to you, Akhil.